Welcome to episode 35 of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. I and my brilliant co-hosts Alison Ettridge from Lightcast and Toby Culshaw from Amazon had the pleasure of speaking with Chris Woodward, an accomplished strategic HR and talent leader with a fascinating career spanning military leadership, global workforce planning, executive coaching and international diplomacy. In the news segment, we explored thought-provoking topics, including whether AI agents can truly become trusted advisors in talent intelligence, the UK's ambitious but potentially underdeveloped plans to become an AI superpower, how Gulf economies are taking a more targeted approach to skills development, and the potential impact of CIA buyouts on the talent market. In our conversation with Chris, we delved into his remarkable journey from military leadership to strategic workforce planning, including his 18-year military career, including multiple tours in Afghanistan and his role as a chief UN negotiator in Cyprus, his transformative leadership roles at organisations like the OECD, AWE and Babcock International, the challenges of strategic workforce planning, especially when facing critical capability gaps in specialised roles, and his insights on the disconnect between long-term capability needs and short-term L&D approaches. Plus his top 3 tips for strategic workforce planning professionals that emphasise strategic clarity, business-wide relationship building and truly understanding how the business creates value. So grab your favourite beverage, settle in for a fascinating journey through military-inspired talent strategies, and let's explore the world of strategic workforce planning with Chris Woodward. Get listening, get learning, and stay intelligent, folks. Have fun. Before we get on with the main event, I wanted to remind you that Lightcast kindly sponsors this podcast. Here's a very well-spoken chap to tell you more about them.
Lightcast is the global authority on labour market data. By collecting, analysing and refining profiles, job postings and market data globally, Lightcast provides actionable, data-driven talent intelligence, giving HR leaders the context to make better decisions. The world's top companies trust Lightcast to deliver clarity in a complex world of work. For more, visit lightcast.io.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. You've tuned into episode 35 of the TI Collective podcast.
Yay!
In our virtual studio today are my brilliant co-hosts Alison Ettridge from Lightcast and Toby Culshaw from Amazon. Say hello, you two.
Hello.
Hello, you too.
Now, today's guest brings a fascinating blend of experience to our conversation. He's gone from leading UN negotiations in Cyprus to shaping the future of workforce planning in the corporate world. Please welcome Chris Woodward. Chris, why don't you tell our listeners about yourself and what it is you do?
Well, hi. Thank you for inviting me to the show. It's a real honour and pleasure to be here. What do I do? I've done a whole load of things in my career. I suppose I'd say I'm a veteran. I'm an executive coach. I've spent some time in consulting and in kind of HR leadership roles, mainly within talent. So time in Korn Ferry, talent consulting, time in manufacturing and engineering firms. And my most recent role was taking over from a chap who you know called Matt Higgs as the global head of strategic workforce planning at Babcock.
We do, Matt, friend of the show indeed. Thank you for Chris. That's a great introduction. Thanks very much. For our new listeners out there, here's how we structure things. First, Toby's going to step up and give us his essential market intelligence roundup and tell us what's happening in the world of TI and people analytics and strategic workforce planning and all things aligned to those 3 areas. And we'll all join in for a little chin wag around that. And then Alison will lead our deep dive with Chris before I pop up and ruin everyone's fun and close out the show. So without further ado, let's dive into this week's insights, Toby. What's caught your eye in the big world that's out there this week?
Well, the first thing that caught my eye was something I wrote. Absolute nepotism here. Absolute nepotism. But, tough luck. It's the way life is. So I wrote a piece on, can AI agents become genuinely trusted advisors in talent intelligence? And it's something that's been rattling around my brain, obviously very pertinent to what's going on in the world at the moment, Gen AI usage, yada, yada, yada. And I think we're seeing a really interesting conversation happening around, can we trust the data? Do we interrogate the data? And then obviously that then lends itself to, if we're putting it within a TI environment. And I think a lot of the platforms and vendors and a lot of the solutions will end up having some kind of Gen AI co-pilot or trusted advisor. And so really pose the question, can these agents really be trusted advisors to TA leadership or business leadership? And how does that really work? And for me, obviously, it ties into, how do you form trust and how do you build those relationships? And it's the whole piece around kind of the reliability of the data, how frequently you're engaging, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought it was a really interesting topic because I wrote about it.
No, it's a good topic, and it's a topic we are always having around AI generally. It's the can we and should we conversations. It's, can we do this with AI? And often most people use that as a proxy for generative AI now. But more importantly, should we? Yeah. So can it? Yeah, they probably will. It probably can be an advisor. Will it be an advisor? Probably in some organisations. Should it be an advisor is probably the big thing. Because generative AI is very good at pretending it understands things and very good at sounding convincing.
That's the point for me, is it could be an advisor. Can it be a trusted advisor, which is what Toby alludes to through his article, right? It's just, can it take a bulk of the work away? Yeah. Absolutely, without a doubt. And in fact, the UK skills report that we published a couple of weeks ago talked about the fact that actually the exponential growth in AI is in non-tech roles. It's not necessarily in tech roles. So exactly that, all of us need to be able to harness the power. But actually, there are nuances in every single conversation that is a talent intelligence conversation that changes depending on what your business leader or what your stakeholder says. So, the only way that you're going to know those is if you've got a human in the loop who's asking the questions, right? Because AI isn't going to say, oh, by the way, what's your appetite for risk in these areas and how does it differ to your colleagues? And then manage that whole process through. It might just go, thanks very much, I've got my new percentages, off I go. Someone's got to ask the actual difficult questions and then manage the responses, I think.
I'd play devil's advocate there a little bit and say it won't ask it unless you program it to ask it.
Yeah, exactly. But you've therefore got to be the advisor that knows to ask those questions, right?
Yeah.
So, can it? Yeah, absolutely it can. But also, are you going to get the same response from if you've got it in a room? I don't know, let's take an example. Let's take location optimizations. Just take that as a really simple example. And you've got your head of real estate and you've got your head of finance and you've got your head of HR and you've got your CEO and you've got head of a business unit. And say, what's your appetite for risk? Can you rank these factors in terms of importance to you? And the ability to attract and retain talent is going to be top of HR's mind. And the cost might be top of the CFO's or cost optimization. Yes, there will be different things. And managing that process and going through that change management and asking the questions with those stakeholders, I don't think is stuff that an AI agent can even pretend to do, actually. Never mind pretend to do well.
No, not in that kind of scenario, definitely. I guess in the future, the AI agent will have access to all of that data itself. So it actually doesn't even need to ask the CFO.
But I guess that's the point, is it's not data, it's in their heads. And it's not until you ask the question that you draw that information out of their heads and then you start to go, oh, okay, that's quite a big, important thing I need to plug into my program.
I think there's something around augmentation, isn't there, rather than just solely trusting the output as a thing in itself. From my advisory days, we were always looking at how can you make humans better rather than taking over from what humans do. And I think it sits in that. I haven't seen kind of AI outputs that I would say really kind of move the dial away from that particularly yet. Is anyone else?
I'm going to be a little bit contrarian here, I think. Mm-hmm. In that I think it comes back to the trusted. I think you could probably have a tech solution that is better than average, and it's probably better than the average of the industry, or the average of what trusted advisors are. But I don't think I think that's the problem. I think the average is probably lower than it needs to be, and the average probably isn't trusted, which is why we often see TI teams and people analytics teams and HR teams struggling to get that leadership buy-in at times, because you need to be better than average to get that trusted advisory status. So I think you probably could have an AI tool that is a very, very good facsimile of an advisor. And I think the TI advisory piece, I think it could absolutely take a lot of that ground. But Alison, to your earlier point, that trusted piece, I think is going to really struggle. It's going to really struggle to build the relationship you need to truly trust.
This reminds me of something that Matt Higgs talked about on his episode of this podcast, when he talked about, and I've had this experience at Babcock as well, where even though on the demand side, it's data from the business, it's the business leaders that don't trust the data, and it's their own data, right? So there is something around, I don't know, upskilling, or just a mindset shift around, trust with data that perhaps needs to evolve more, just in general, don't you think?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I was I don't think it's just contrarian at all, but it's mostly looking at things from a different perspective around the democratization of stuff. I was at an event a couple of weeks back for a company called Coach Hub, who are a digital coaching platform in essence, but the platform is something that you have coaches on one side and coachees on the other. So it's still humans very much powering it, but they were launching their new AI coaching platform. So the human coach, to a certain degree, has been removed, and the coaching is delivered by generative AI, and it was all very well received. But their angle wasn't that the generative AI was necessarily better than a human coach. They weren't even arguing that. They were arguing that providing it via generative AI democratizes the access to coaching. So typically in most organizations, your coachees are your top 1%, if that, sometimes even less. And your coaches are few and far between. And generally it's your very senior executives or your high potential folk that are getting coaching. But through something like the generative AI coaching, you're getting suddenly access to it for everybody in the organization. Might not quite be at the standard that your hypos are getting and your executives, but you're getting more than you had before. So it's definitely a step forward. And the same could apply to a TI solution that's powered by generative AI, and that for their organizations that at the moment have no TI function, having a Gen AI powered one is a step forward.
Let's build one.
Yeah. I'm sure people are.
Don't know if they are.
How can it be?
I don't know. We'll ask ChatGPT.
Don't challenge me with things like that. Toby knows I'll go away and I'll come back 3 weeks later and go, hey, you go, guys.
Exactly. That's exactly the cheapest way to get to an MVP.
Exactly. Oh. Go on, Toby, what else is happening?
It's been National Apprenticeship Week. Anyway, for the last week, maybe the week before, it's been a long week here, I tell you already, for the UK. And one of the things that got highlighted off the back of National Apprenticeship Week was really working on the UK government. And so Keir Starmer a little while back said that the UK was going to be one of the great AI superpowers. And I think we discussed it on the last pod, in actual fact. And there's the AI Opportunities Action Plan, which is all aimed at kind of boosting economic growth and jobs for the future, et cetera, et cetera. But there was an article in People Management magazine by Tim Stewart, who was really kind of putting that to the test and saying, well, this is all great, but do we actually have the resources and the implementation plan to make this happen? It's all well and good saying we need all these AI skills, but so does everybody else. And it's all well and good saying we need this, but how are we actually going to do this? How are we actually going to train up hundreds of thousands of individuals or tens of thousands of individuals? How are we actually going to train this through and deliver on this? So there was some interesting stuff around kind of as part of the AI Opportunities Action Plan, having apprenticeships in data and AI, which is really interesting. But I think that for me, that it came through that it really didn't feel like there was as much teeth there and a solid, this is how we're going to do it, versus some other regions, which we can talk about in a minute, like the Middle East and the Gulf. It feels like the UK's action plan is still a bit theoretical rather than practical for my liking.
I think our play is going to be, and I've just shared the paper that we did on the UK skills, pace of change of skills in the UK. And this was talking about Skills England and where they've identified digital technologies as one of the priority sectors, right? Which is links to then Keir Starmer saying we're going to be the AI capital. But I think that the key takeout for me was that actually, if you stop trying to compete in the generative AI neural networks, which are 3,000% higher in terms of demand than they were a year ago, and you start looking in other areas, then actually it might seem counterintuitive, but actually you could say, well, in research, how do our researchers leverage AI to analyse huge data sets and generate insights? Or in sales, how do we use generative AI to optimize customer interactions, to generate leads? In talent intelligence, how do we use it to gather data and create content that's relevant? So I think it depends what the UK means by being a centre of AI technology, rather than just we need to build a whole bunch of technical skills.
And that probably also lends into, if you look at the UK government and kind of the contracts they're putting out, a huge number of the contracts at the moment are around AI implementation within the UK government.
Yes.
So, absolutely. We may not need to fully reskill the workforce or the youth coming through the education system. And, I've been very open about my views on the education system historically. But as you say, if it's a practical application and implementation, that's a very different beast than, say, going after the data center and infrastructure stuff like the Middle East has been doing.
Yeah.
I think there's some deep complexities with what Keir Starmer said, but I've also experienced something similar when I think as part of a nuclear skills task force, we said that we would double the amount of apprentices and early careers for Babcock. And that is great. And I think what Keir Starmer's done by saying, we're going to get after this is great. It kind of puts a flag in the sand, as it were. But then it then turned into a bit of a reverse engineering exercise rather than being a demand-driven one. And this talks to the difference between different countries that you're alluding to, doesn't it? Where, where's the strategy here in the UK? And why is it so short-term, right? So we ended up having to go, right, if we're going to double our numbers, where are they going to go to add best effects across the different capability areas of the business? I think it's complex. And I think the other thing that I've seen from reading about Skills England is that a lot of the solutions here, I think, are going to be enterprise level rather than specific organizations doing specific things. And so the collaboration between academia and businesses and networks of businesses and suppliers all coming together on that common purpose is almost a bit new ground, I think, for many organizations. So we'll have to see how that comes together.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that you kind of mentioned about the different regions there. And one of the other topics I was going to flag today was around the Gulf economies. And they're looking at very similar talent shortages. And the Gulf Cooperation Council have really doved. I can't speak today. But they're really diving into this. And they're focusing on things like incubation for innovation, upskilling local talent, really looking at driving and empowering women in the workforce. And it feels like at a regional level, they're being a lot more pragmatic and specific around this, and really saying, what are the big ticket items we want to kick off to deliver this. So innovation, there's lots of different regions that are getting different investment funds, and IBM and KPMG, PwC, lots of different places that are investing into the regions from a kind of a practical local perspective. And I think that's what I quite liked. This was coming out of the World Economic Forum at the beginning of this month. But I like the fact it's quite targeted and it's quite specific. I saw a real variance in how the UK seems to be addressing this versus the Gulf.
I wrote an article on this, and I think we talked about it a little bit last time round when I'd just come back from the Knowledge Forum in Dubai, where the UAE has a skills strategy till 2030 and a skills strategy to 2070. with really smart, achievable, measurable targets along the way. They've just the way that the approach to economic development in a non-democratic country, whatever our views are around that, it is just completely different, because you haven't got this cyclical nature of what am I going to achieve within my cycle. There's this long-term vision of this is what I need to achieve for the better, good of the country. I actually think it's quite dangerous for Westernized economies, because we're going to start to see a big difference.
Maybe we need to all move to dictatorships then.
I think last time we said we weren't going to talk about that.
Well,
I think we need to, joking aside, we need to move to a scenario where, and we can talk about this a little bit when we talk about Chris's time in the military. We want to move to a scenario where you're thinking longer term.
Yeah, I agree.
And just your view, right?
There should be pan-government initiatives, shouldn't they?
100%.
That actually irrelevant of who's in power. They all come together and actually say this is something we're looking at over 10 years,
100%.
over 20 years, whatever it might be. But that I agree entirely.
Yeah, I met a really interesting lady called Sana, I'm so sorry, Cabarina, I may have pronounced that wrong, who wrote the AI strategy for the last UK government. And I said, will it change massively with the new government coming in? She said, no, probably not. So actually there's probably this, it might be rewritten and tweaked in places. But I'd like to think that in the background, therefore, there is this consistency of this is a strategy. It's just not looking far enough out.
I think it's looking far enough out, but also looking for cheap brownie points in the short term.
Yeah.
But I think we're so stuck in this 4-year cycle of people trying to throw the previous administration under the bus, make themselves look good, and the whole kind of spin selling and pivoting of facts and falsehoods and mistruths, etc. And I think there's some things, as you say, that should just be the foundation. It's like, look, this stuff these are the golden gooses that we don't slaughter. Just let them crack on. They've got to be the foundation in place, and education and skills development's got to be the number one.
And if you think about that in our environment, when you have an education system that is primarily funded by a government, right, and by the cyclical rounds of that government, then of course you're then going to end up in, well, I need to wait for my funding cycle in order to determine what skills we're going to do and what career pathways we're going to do and what our curriculum looks like. And yet we're in an environment where the pace of change for skills is so fast that by the time they've got to the end of their funding cycle and are able to release the budget for the next year, they're already chasing their tails.
Does this come back to my theory that I think I said in the middle of last year around enterprise companies are going to end up working like football academies?
Yes.
Where they're going to start targeting younger and younger and have their own private education systems, because they can just move so much faster and more nimbly. Yeah. And the school system and the education system just can't keep up. They just can't keep up.
I agree.
Yeah, the problem is, I was about to say that many organisations act very much like governments. So as soon as they have a change of leadership, whether it's the leader of HR or CEO, they go on their 3 or 4 year transformation programme where they change everything that the previous leadership put in place. What else is happening then, Toby? Should we do one more before we go on to Chris's interview?
Yes. What a depressing world. So just to add to long-term thinking, the US government. Let's go on to that fun bus. So the CIA.
I'm just reversing out of the room.
Just going to remind you who we're sponsored by. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Go for it, Toby.
By the US government. No, let's just be clear. But the US government have been doing some fun things, obviously. And the CIA were one of the first agencies to offer buyouts to their entire workforce, which happened at the beginning of this month, so being of Feb. I think it's from a TI perspective, I have no perspective on the politics or what's going on or Doge or any of the way it's happening or anything else. But from a pure TI perspective, I think it's fascinating because you're going to end up with a small army of incredibly intelligent, incredibly highly skilled individuals suddenly hitting that workforce. And how does that affect the local economy? How does that affect the relocation? You're seeing house prices already starting to take a hit. Well, how does that affect things? I think it's, from a pure workforce planning TI perspective, I think it would be fascinating to know who actually did the workforce planning for this long term and saying what's the attrition rate we're trying to hit for on all of this. But I don't think we're ever going to get that. But I think from a pure macro workforce perspective, it's fascinating because there's some amazing talent that's going to be coming onto the market going, I don't want to work for this administration anymore. I don't want to work for the government anymore. And it's going to be fascinating from a skills development perspective.
Yeah. Do you know, I hadn't thought about it like that at all. I was just busy thinking, if you offer a buyout, how on earth do you control who goes and who doesn't? And therefore, are you just letting all of your top talent walk out of the door?
True.
But then if you are doing that, then where does that top talent then go? Yeah, it's really interesting. Maybe we should find a way of monitoring that.
Shall we move on to the interview?
Yeah, we can do
What
that.
do we reckon? You ready, Alison?
I'm
More
ready.
importantly, are you ready, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it, shall we?
Cool.
Over to you, Alison.
Fab. Chris, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us today. I think you and I had a brief conversation at the end of January of this year, just in a connecting way. And you just spouted out lots of the work and the projects that you had been doing. And I was like, oh my goodness me. We need to have you on to talk about some of these things. So I know you've given a brief history of your background, but can you start by kind of going back to where you started and the military and then the work that kind of came through that, if you don't mind, and then we can dive into some of the detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So some people have got fairly typical careers, and mine's definitely not one of those. So I mean, all the way back in school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I chose the A-levels that I enjoyed the most, right? And
What were they?
I've always been someone who's enjoyed a bit of adventure. I'm inquisitive, so I'm, putting my hand up to say why about things. Why is that? To your earlier point. And I then thought, do you know what? The thing that really floats my boat is being able to do or be as capable as I can be. So kind of maximizing my own potential. And these things combined, and I ended up going into Sandhurst, which is the Officer Training Academy. And I thought, you know what, I'll do 3 years, I'll leave, I'll go and work in the city, become a millionaire by the age of 30, and that will be me, right? And so 18 years later, I end up leaving military career through a mixture of other career opportunities, medical reasons because of injuries and so on, and then moving into consulting. What I was able to do in that time in the military was really understand, because you lead from day one, the impact of good leadership and you can see quite clearly where leadership's not good. You were talking about longer term and shorter term strategies as well. I ended up being on this conveyor belt of operational tours in and out of Afghanistan. I cut my teeth before that in South Armagh, doing kind of counter-terrorism operations against the IRA there. And so you end up understanding how to fuse all sorts of intelligence pictures with operational requirements and working with multiple agencies right from the off. But you also learn how people and collaboration come together to really kind of make things work. And it's about outcomes. There's also a very, very low political context in those environments. Anyway, when I ended up going into kind of this OPHERIC, it was called, an Afghanistan campaign, I was in and out so many times. I did 4 full tours, so over 2 years worth of my time, plus loads of other visits. And what you could see there was significant differences being made at local levels. But again, back to that political context, a lack of a longer term strategy. And we saw this, didn't we, at the end of just before COVID, when, we ended up the first Trump administration. I think Trump said, let's call this to an end. And in essence, the Taliban were able to come back into power, and look at where we're at now, with women's rights being pretty much where they were before anything happened, which is a real shame. But at a local level, we saw some real differences being made, benefits being seen, and so on. But I think what I learned from all of that was that it became really intense. It was a bit of a head down and really focusing on the work of that time. And what really made those operational wins was how people work together. In the army, they call it battle grouping. Mm-hmm. And so you get people with different clearly defined capabilities all coming together, planning well on the whole, and then leading well with fairly clear accountabilities to get stuff done. So it's that kind of context that I kind of developed from an operational perspective, that I then, I did an HR master's and an MBA, because defence is actually quite good at developing its people, certainly those who stick their hand up anyway. And then was able to go, do you know what? On operations, this all makes sense. But then when you're not on operations, when you're back in your day job or a staff role, you find that that's where the politics comes back in and the subjectivity comes back in. And so what I saw through career management, career development, was so career management really was when you get people who are promoted because of the amount of time that they've done in their rank, because they are of a certain cap, badge or regiment, because they've been written on by this person who's more senior than that person who's more junior. And I started to get slightly frustrated by this because of what I'd learned through the academic stuff that I'd learned. But also the last role I did in the army was a real opportunity. It was called the External Placement Programme. And it was set up because the current, I suppose you'd call it chief people officer or director personnel as it was known, realised at the time that there were a whole load of skills that the army couldn't train in-house, but it still needed. Things like commercial skills around data and data analytics, how to be more innovative, and things like that. And so I was brought in, I fought for this one, but I was then brought in to create a model, brought into policy for how we set up two things: placements with industry to really look at, well, what's the return on investment for new skills that we need and where would we place them in the organisation to best effect? And secondly, how do we create a more through career development offer by aligning university programmes to people of all, kind of ranks across the organisation? So like a through career development pathway. And so off the back of that role, which I'd love to talk a bit more about that because I think it was really interesting.
Yes.
I then landed into a company called Korn Ferry, really learning everything about talent management and competency science.
Can you, if you look back at the work that you did, because I think you're right, that work was really interesting. And actually, I love the idea of battle grouping. And I was thinking that in the world of talent intelligence, we don't really do that. We try to bring in different views, but actually we tend to still be quite insular rather than saying what are our different capabilities and how do we come together to tackle a specific outcome. But if you look back now at what you did then, would you do it the same way or would you bring different skills to it?
To which bit particularly?
So when you were building out particularly the career pathways within the army.
I learned a lot. So I made mistakes on the way. And so I kind of learned on the job. But what was crucial was my ticket into the senior officer's office was insight. So you have to lead with insight and it has to be a with them, what's in it for them.
Yeah.
And landed in a, respectful way, but almost a call for action without being, always the person shouting about risk, right?
Yeah.
But what I was able to do on the external placement program is really kind of help people understand, look, you're the capability owner. What is it that you want or need to be able to focus on in, say, 2 years' time or 3 years' time? Or what is it that you want to be able to do now that you can't? And just almost from asking coaching questions, help people kind of almost lift their head up a bit and look more to the future. And also to start thinking about skills and competencies rather than, more of the same in terms of job titles. I remember one conversation where I said to one chap, what's going to really make the difference from a capability perspective going forwards? And the answer was, I'm going to need more high quality lieutenant colonels. I was like, oh, right. So we had to take a couple of steps back and really start to unpack, what it is that actually creates value, in terms of the work that we're doing.
But isn't it interesting? You say that and we laugh, but I can hear that in most organisations now. I can hear people going, what is it that you need? Well, I need more brilliant XYZs.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to figure out what makes them brilliant. Right, let's come backwards. I should have said right at the very beginning of that, and apologise for not doing it. Thank you for your time, and thank you for 4 tours and Operation Herrick, plus the other work. We couldn't, massive thank you. Talk a little bit about some of the stuff you did at KF, at Korn Ferry.
Yeah, so reimagining talent was pretty much what we'd done, or I'd done with my team in Army headquarters. And so really innovating around talent, but also the frustrations I'd had in that role around the subjectivity of career management meant that I was automatically had a bias for getting into almost the science behind it. And so the competency science that Korn Ferry had, I felt really called to. And then, so the work I did there, I spoke to a lot of leaders. I mean, Korn Ferry, the benefit it has is that it's in the boardroom because of its search function. And then the advisory work comes off the back of that quite often. And so we're able to speak to really senior stakeholders and really understand what are the strategic priorities and what is it that they really want to try and get after with people who can actually do that. My role was really around organisational strategy, and with that, think whole talent lifecycle really. So everything from talent strategies through to operating models, and also integrating between different areas of HR to help the whole function become more strategic. So I was part of the reward practice and did a little bit of work in the leadership practice as well. So when you bring it all together, if you're bringing to life a talent strategy, and there was one organisation I worked with in the pharmaceutical sector who had a CEO who was young and ambitious and driven and really wanted to empower the workforce. And we were asked to design and derive a talent strategy that would do that, one that would almost flip the power balance to empower, away from the organization to meet the needs of the employees so that you could really help empower people, but also people can forge their own careers based on their own development, their own aspirations, in a way to try and boost engagement across the workforce. And we were able to really align, proper strategic objectives with talent imperatives, and then go, okay, well, if we're going to do this, then what are the rewards? So what's our definition for leadership going to be if leaders are going to have to almost have a different locus of control, where it's not about what they need to do, but how they can support others to be the best that they can be. Shifting the dial around, so leadership being more about the privilege to serve those who you lead, rather than bringing people together just to drive to an outcome.
Do you know what the outcomes of that were?
Well, we don't always stick around as consultants, but I know that the talent strategy has gone on some evolutions there. But there were definitely, this organisation's gone on a fairly big, strategic HR maturity journey, with this being at the heart of it.
Cool.
I know that they've managed to, their ambitions were to increase patient centricity, employee engagement, reduce levels of churn, and I believe that they were kind of getting after that, but I haven't seen data.
No, it's okay. I think it's really interesting. The CEO's obviously still there, so it's got to be good in some ways. So what happened after that?
So I worked for a number of clients at Korn Ferry. Another client was an international organisation that I then subsequently worked for, and so having won this bid, it was all about HR function maturity and setting the scenes for an HR transformation. And this piece of work landed really well. And I think that for me, one of the key learnings here, certainly from an SWP perspective, is that relationships are vital, absolutely vital. This is not just about winning work and delivering it. This is around, how do you partner with people? How do you, come alongside and support them to do what they're doing? And we adopted that approach, when we were supporting this organisation as consultants. But then I was asked after a year or so later to go and head up the whole HR function of this organisation. I'll talk about it. It's the OECD. This was an interim role for a year and a bit, in essence, to deliver not just BAU for the function, which was 83 people in a highly political international organisation, but to deliver that transformation itself. And the reason it kind of landed well for me and was a good fit is because a lot of the programs I was leading were around career architecture enablement, right? Mm-hmm. So I'd had a background in that. And after I'd finished my time at Korn Ferry, I went kind of towards the beginning of COVID off to Capgemini, which was really interesting to get after the technology ecosystem side of talent and really understand how technology augments some of the thinking around talent management. And so from an OECD perspective, I was able to look at all sorts of different technology platforms. How do we create a new competency framework? How do we arrange and organize jobs and roles in the organization? And ultimately, there are a whole load of pain points there that we were seeking to overcome that this started to get after. So it spoke to being more objective around performance management, doing performance management in a more empathetic, developmental way, and then making sure that we had objective data of which to say, well, this is why this person is ready. So real focus on potential rather than just performance, and objective criteria being met to say, actually, this person, we need to retain them or not, or we promote them or not. And so we managed to expand the talent management and analytics team there somewhat during my time, and my successors done so as well. And I think that it's right and proper that happens, especially as the OECD is an organisation that prides itself on the quality of its data. Anyway, but organisations don't always do internally what they do, what they sell on the outside, do they? So,
how much? I'm interested to know how much you used any external data to bring context to those conversations, or is that something that's kind of come along, later in your career?
I think it possibly has come along slightly later. It's been one of those kind of burning requirements that I've struggled to grab hold of until more recently. I worked for a manufacturing firm that used a company to really help bring all the skills to job profiles. Mm-hmm. But to be honest with you, I've in my role as head of SWP, we've had a real need to look at external market data. We've fished around for all sorts of different data sets. Babcock is quite a niche organisation, so I don't know whether we've landed on something where we think, that's a really good representation of the market or for particular skills. There's some weird roles and skills needed in Babcock, like nuclear welders and pipe fitters and things like that. But we've definitely started to look at it. And one of the things that I did recently was a criticality exercise to support a massive new bid around submarine servicing. And that has needed us to look at scarcity of talent in the market. And how we have done that has been regionally. So actually, where do we find these skills in the UK or more broadly? What are our competitors doing in this space? And so on. We've spoken to a number of companies. Talent Neuron, I think, was one of them. But there's others clearly out there like Cast, etc. So.
Bless you. I didn't even have to write that in chat.
Listen, dug yourself out that hole. Well done.
That's it. You're top of the class. Nothing else can go wrong. You talk when we touched base in January. You talked about running demand skills work streams. Can you talk a little bit more about what that meant and any outcomes that came from that?
So I think just reflecting on, there was something in the Talent Intelligence Collective WhatsApp thread that I just really chimes with this. And that's how we've got better at the supply side, but actually the demand side of SWP is almost slightly harder, and it depends on the strategic clarity and the maturity of planning processes in organizations, and therefore it's almost slightly different in every organization you go to. And I think that one of the perennial issues that I was having to navigate at Babcock was we had an integrated business planning process, but we needed to really understand how we get better at not just creating demands, but then organizing everything after that. So, for example, the criticality exercise that we ran created a future-focused view on what the key capabilities needed to be for this part of the business, which is at least 10,000 FTE in that particular part of the business. And these capability groups, the so what's then was, well, okay, if we know from a capacity perspective that we're going to need something ridiculous like 4,000 new heads within 10 years, and I think it was more than that actually, then and then from a capability perspective, it's going to need to be these types of roles and so on. The market was, I mean, we got market data which suggested it's from a traffic light system all red. Good luck was the outcome of it. How are you going to do that? And the answer was, well, we need to rethink how we do this. We need to be building our own capabilities. And when it comes to apprenticeship pathways, they're like 4 years. So what do we need to be doing in mid-2029 was the question that we were asking ourselves, because that needed a decision before Christmas. And so we were absolutely looking at trying to upskill, but this wasn't a formal module or learning intervention. This was almost every conversation that me and my team were having around the business was on understanding how do we build capability, how do we innovate our thinking around how do we do this, and how do we understand that we need to be more future focused in our workforce planning. And there's a number of things that really came out in those conversations. One is there's quite a lot of bad busy. Everyone's busy now in the moment. How do we lift people's heads to help them understand the future? And I think secondly, how do we make sure that the skills that we're looking for aren't too prescriptive or precedent based? I think that we were able to, Matt Higgs would talk about, as I do, the 9B model at Babcock, but we only really do 3 or 4 of those Bs in earnest. What can we genuinely do across the rest of the HR space to properly innovate in the way that we were around external placements in the army? I mean, some of the stories there were pretty cool. That if we can do that there at an enterprise level, we can do that certainly within a business.
It's so interesting as well, because you talk about, when we compared the labour market data and we looked at our critical capability gaps, that you then suddenly go, oh my God, everything's red. There's kind of then the, okay, so what are we going to do? We can't just say everything's red. We have to get on with it. Sorry, Toby, go on. You were about to interject. Sorry.
I get told off for not speaking then when I do.
Sorry. And then I talk. Sorry, Toby, go ahead.
No. It ties in very much with what you're just saying, though. So my thought when you were talking through that, Chris, is the multi-year nature of a lot of this, where if you need something 5-10 years out and it takes 4 years to develop, and then you've got the budget cycles and the business case, that could add another couple of years. Like you end up with these kind of multi-year pieces very, very, very fast. you see a lot of that conversation happening in kind of most SWP teams. You see it happening in TI teams, and we obviously see it in the groups. How much from your side have you seen this really being driven from like the core L&D teams as well? Are you seeing the same demand signals and the L&D teams looking at that external demand, looking at the feasibility of the demand, or is it still coming from kind of the TA, SWP, people analytics side of the house, rather than being driven by the people who would potentially argue they should own the skills?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing, or what I have seen, is, and it's shown in my inbox, is the business is the one shouting the loudest about what we need and what we, and where the pain points are. And I think also you see SWP teams jumping up and down saying, look, gosh, there's a risk, or we need to mobilize and move in this space, and so on. And, the problem statements that we are able to talk about are rich in insight, but urgency as well. I found that L&D is sometimes quite short-term focused in the organisations I've worked. I know that this is maybe different in other organisations, but it's about solving the commercial priority of the time in terms of, right, if we just upskill in this area this year, we'll do better. Or actually, is L&D genuinely funded and resourced in a way that's going to develop capability? Question mark. Not always. Very often it's an LMS, or we'll give people some Skillsoft licenses and off you pop. I think that to quote Josh Burson's skills academies, or capability academies rather, I think that an organization needs to be really clear strategically on those things that it needs to develop, and make sure that it's allowing individuals to really see those opportunities, giving people more voice, more choice, more access to this, and then understanding where they can employ that better, which is not just L&D in my view. This is about how you enable talent to thrive in an organisation.
It almost comes back to that old quote of, I want to say Richard Branson. He may not have said this, but it was like, what if we don't invest in our people and they stay, or invest in their people and they're going to go, or what if we don't invest and they're going to stay? It almost feels like L&D, the investment is that short-term reactionary. They find the pain, solve today, but they're not really focused on tomorrow because the people might leave by that point. So it almost feels like the kind of skills development and L&D piece has probably had its hand forced slightly from a cost perspective and a finance perspective rather than a future capability perspective. And it's that risk mitigation. It's the focus has been on the cost rather than the risk element.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
I murdered that quote as well. I don't remember what the actual quote is, but I completely murdered it. Got it the wrong way around and inside out. Terrible quote.
You did completely murder it. It was, yeah. And I was about to correct you on it, and now I've tried to. I'm thinking I'm not sure I can get it right anyway. So I'm not going to, because I'll just screw it up. Chris, I think ignore your error message. I think you'll be fine. So just keep cracking on.
Cool.
So I think you're moving on to Pastures New. Very exciting. I'm hearing on the grapevine that you may be setting up a consultancy of sorts. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, this has been something that I've wanted to do for a year or two, I think. But I have a slight demon on my shoulder that has a preference for permanent work, or I have my own limiting beliefs, put it that way. And I think it stems from having been in the forces for 18 years and then going through resettlement. So I've been out, 6 years? I'm nearly a civvy. I'm still on my journey. But yeah, this is what I want to. I just realised that actually I have a story that's interesting, and actually the compilation of experiences and skills that I bring are something that really fuels a number of things. So for me, development is my purpose. I've always sought to learn, and I've sought to add value to organisations, teams, and individuals. And so an advisory practice that really looks at organisational effectiveness, in particular around how the people function, become more strategic. What I've seen certainly through SWP, is it's a real opportunity to drive value into a business through people, through the HR function. And I'm fed up, to be honest with you, of HR functions just being seen as a cost, or HR and the business. Gosh, people are your business. Let's get on to that kind of bit of messaging, but also let's show the value and create measure of effects from people into the business through more strategic HR functions. I think at the heart of that is around organisational planning, and I rewrote how to do organisational planning for the military when I was as an instructor at Sandhurst. I know that's more military stuff, but actually there's a whole load of useful collaborative and integrated business planning kind of methodologies that fall out of that organisations sometimes struggle to do in a coherent way. But the other key things are around, how do we collaborate better? To go back to that battle grouping aspect, it's about outcomes and strategic clarity. So helping organizations create that clarity and then bring a process to it, as well as the behaviors. So not just the technical competence, but the relational competencies that go with it. I think it plays into some of the work I was doing from Korn Ferry experiences. And my real passion, having just trained and qualified as an executive coach, is to maximize the potential of people. So one string to the bow will be to support execs on their own kind of career journeys as well. So focusing on organizational transformations, team effectiveness, and coaching the right execs at the right time.
Love that. 3 top tips for anyone in the world of strategic workforce planning right now.
Wow. I think, firstly, get your strategy right. Get it clear. Those organizations that have really taken the time to do this, so much follows on from that is a benefit. I think the second point would be SWP straddles the business. It's not a neat fit just within HR, but that's okay. Make friends across the business, and so relational competence. It's all. I've seen people in SWP that are phenomenal data analysts. They're in their back cave, and suddenly you've got this amazing data insight that comes from it. But you've got to be landing with people in a way that works for them. So collaboration and relationship management, I think, is key. And then I think the third and final point is you've got to really understand the value from the insight, i.e. how does the business work? How does it tick? And so, you've got to be in the business, more so even than, and more strategically than an HR business partner, in my view. So those would be my 3 top tips.
Love it. I didn't warn you those were coming, and those were awesome. And actually, it's interesting because what you're really doing is you're tying back to battle grouping, right? Albeit that's probably not a civvy term, but bringing in different capabilities, bringing everyone together, making sure you figured out your allies. So I'm also hearing if anybody is interested in understanding more about how they can make their business more effective, how they can grow through their people, how they can go through HR transformation, that I know a man that they should talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy for a call anytime.
Cool.
Excellent. That was amazing, Chris. I'm normally reasonably quiet during the interview, but I always pop up with 1 or 2 questions. But there, I was just happy to sit back and listen to your incredibly interesting, I think some would say incredibly eclectic career. But it kind of, every step is obvious in terms of that career, and kind of seeing how those constituent parts have all come together to make you the professional you are today kind of all makes absolute logical sense. So thanks so much. Before we let you go, how have you found the show yourself?
Do you know what? I like the fact that we're not too structured on this. Dare I say that, Alan?
We're not.
This is what I prefer, and to be able to chat to real authorities in your fields in a really informal way makes the conversation richer. And I love that about the other episodes of this podcast as well. So thank you for doing these. It's a real privilege to be part of it. And I'll stay listening.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. Brilliant. A quick thank you to our wonderful listeners as well. If you've enjoyed today's masterclass, share it with your network. Whether you're in HR, TA, TI, SWP, people analytics, whatever it might be, we think there's something here for anyone who wants to think more strategically about talent. So, as ever, a big goodbye from me, a goodbye from us. Say bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And as ever, stay curious, stay strategic, and most importantly, stay intelligent, folks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Before you go, I want to remind you about our generous sponsor, Lightcast. Here's that well-spoken fellow again to tell you about their amazing product.
Lightcast is the global authority on labour market data. By collecting, analysing and refining profiles, job postings and market data globally, Lightcast provides actionable, data-driven talent intelligence, giving HR leaders the context to make better decisions. The world's top companies trust Lightcast to deliver clarity in a complex world of work. For more, visit lightcast.io.